Robert, we will not address conclusions. Dinesh D'Souza is categorical in his conclusions, and that's fine. You can go watch it. I believe you either have to subscribe to Dinesh on Locals to get access to the documentary, or buy it. Is it available for free on Rumble? I don't think it is. Right?
No. It's still for sale. And I mean, the best deal is you get a whole year subscription to Dinesh D'Souza's community on Locals, and then you get the movie for free. And so I would recommend that, the 25-minute mark to the 45-minute mark is the core of the evidentiary theory of the movie.
And now, it's not to be critical for the sake of being critical. The movie is very simple. It can actually be summed up in 3 points. That effectively, they used Dinesh D'Souza bought data on people's cell phones. I mean, like,
well, the company True the Vote did.
Okay, sorry, that was not to blame or anything. It's just say the way their methodology was to purchase basically tracking data on cell phones within a certain geographic area, all legally. It's gathered by cell phones to then identify. They set parameters. They got a ton of data from cell phone geolocation movements. They filtered it down to say we are only interested in cell phone data tracking, which shows that an individual. I don't want to make a mistake on the numbers, but went to 50 ballot drop-off locations in a day, and also went to 5 polling or voting. What's the word I'm looking for here?
I think it was 10 drop boxes and 5 501c3 organizations that were involved in supporting election turnout.
So the methodology for everybody, this is the crux of the movie. It's an hour-and-a-half documentary, but
it's I would say it's half. The other half is the surveillance data.
Oh, well, I lumped that together. I would have said the other half was who's financing these not-for-profits that are involved in, motivating people to vote. But so bottom line, he acquires a ton of data, geolocations within a certain geographic vicinity based on cell phone data, filters it down to say whatever, it was either 10 or whatever, people visiting drop boxes and also visiting these entities which are involved in promoting voting, and found that there were people, which hence the 2,000 Mules, these people who seem to have been visiting lots of ballot box drop-off stations and lots of organization locations as well, within certain parameters that would not be an accident. It's like nobody's going to that many ballot box drop-offs for no good reason or for no other reason. And then found that, there were these in various states, 2,000 mules, basically he's likening it to drug trafficking, who would go and drop off ballots in ballot boxes. Then they acquired video surveillance of various ballot drop-offs.
And by the way, that had been legally required. So the whole pitch with these drop boxes was, don't worry, there'll be live 24/7 video surveillance available of everyone who goes and drops off a ballot. Now, in some places, they weren't maintaining the surveillance system as they were supposed to. In some places, they didn't keep copies of it. But in all instances, the Republican National Committee was asleep at the wheel, misdirecting resources, and did not have people watching this on a daily basis. Because if they had, they would have seen, again, this is open source data. Some people are saying, well, this was private information. It's like, no, this is not private information. This was publicly recorded cameras that were required, that if you used a Dropbox, you knew you would be publicly recorded and video surveilled when you put any ballot in order to check as to be a measurement, a safety protection against illicit methods of ballot trafficking.
Interesting. It's amazing. So they have these drop-off ballot boxes so that everybody can go and make it easier to vote, COVID and yada yada. They were supposed to have surveillance footage 24/7. Which ones, which states? Because this is a bipartisan critique on the voting system used in 2020. Not drawing any conclusions, just bipartisan. Which states apparently did not have the 24/7 surveillance that they were required to have?
Well, it varied by Dropbox by county. So it wasn't so much that it was statewide. What you would find is in some Some places they had it maintained, some places they didn't. And they used the Open Records Act in Georgia. There's variations of the Freedom of Information Act laws, sunshine laws, as they're sometimes called, open records laws in some places. And they used those to get this surveillance data. And from the surveillance data, they were able to align this with the cell phone data they had to see, okay, who's showing up that might match this unusual cell phone data where they're visiting multiple locations where these drop boxes are located, and multiple locations where voter registration and election voter turnout organizations were located. And what they found was a lot of anomalous things. They found people dropping off more than one ballot. They saw people putting more than one ballot in. They saw these people appearing multiple times at that and other drop boxes, putting multiple ballots in. They saw these same people sometimes doing it at like 3 or 4 in the morning. They saw some of these people acting furtively when they approached the box, like looking around, that kind of thing. And they also saw them at various points wearing surgical gloves to put the ballots. And as soon as they put the ballots in, put them all in, sometimes they carry bags with them and the rest. Then they would turn around, take the surgical gloves off, and throw them in the trash can. Which, Robert, what does that do? Is it prevents fingerprints on who put those ballots in.
Let's go one by one. What does furtively mean for those who may not know, like me?
So furtively, kind of a combination of secretive and suspicious. Kind of you do something in almost a hesitating manner that suggests you're concerned about being monitored or being seen or being watched or being observed. And now, they documented that the scale of this was they just focused on the states that were very close: Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Arizona. Michigan ended up being not as close. So really, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, those are the quartet of key states. And they found inferential evidence based on their data that more ballots would be in question than the margin of victory in each of those states. And just using the surveillance data and the geolocation data. By the way, this was recommended to the Republican National Committee in November. And it was the Republican National Committee that quashed it. They not only failed to monitor any of these things before the election. Afterwards, people like Patrick Witt, running for insurance commissioner in Georgia, volunteering his time, other people volunteering their time, lawyers volunteering our time, said, look, we need to build the resources to have Matt Brainerd, Richard Barris, all looking at from the data side, to have forensic investigators on the ground, to do massive Open Records Act requests, or simply compel, as part of the election contest process, the production of these surveillance files, the signature match files that will also occur. And the Republican National Committee said they were going to do it, raised over $100 million, saying they were going to investigate and spend this to deal with the election. And then they misdirected that funds, as far as I know, and as was confirmed by Jenna as well.
Okay, so here's one question, and this is to steelman the potential defense to Dinesh D'Souza's documentary. There could be reasons for which an individual is dropping off more than one ballot in a ballot box, correct?
It depends on the state. In most states, that's illegal, period. You could only bring your own ballot in, period. So and in fact, in many of these states where it happened, in Wisconsin and other places, in Georgia, in Arizona, ballot harvesting was illegal in many of these locations, number one. And what ballot harvesting is where a third party can collect and deliver your ballot. In fact, the drop boxes themselves were often in violation of law. This is what's being litigated in Wisconsin. Drop boxes were not authorized under Wisconsin law. What happened was Zuckerberg came in, gave hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to local election officials as what the former Wisconsin Supreme Court Justice legislature appointed special counsel determined was flat out bribery, went in and bribed these election officials to bring in all these drop boxes and as well to mass mail out a whole bunch of ballots targeting low propensity Democratic voting constituencies and counties to have a partisan edge, that's where the 501c3 violation is. And do it en masse. And so what happened is a person coming and delivering the ballots, in many of these places, they couldn't deliver more than their own. And two, to the degree that there was any laws allowing third-party pickup and delivery, that third-party only California and a few states have real liberalized rules on this. Most of it had to be like a family member, had to be a friend, things
Someone
like
with power of attorney, I presume.
Power of attorney, the equivalent thereof, something like that. That clearly is not what's happening here. And that would explain 2 or 3 ballots. It wouldn't explain all of these, and also it wouldn't explain why they're using drop boxes so much. In other words, drop boxes was an institutionalized mechanism to allow illicit, what I call constitutionally unqualified ballots to be counted. Because my analysis was always threefold, and if people saw Dinesh DeSousa's presentation at the end of the premiere of the film, basically sounded exactly like my speech right before the election on this show and with Richard Bears, which was what was happening was the election effectively, the election officials were telling the entire world, all in almost every state, this happened at some level, saying, by the way, the safe is open, the front door is unlocked, the security guards are gone, and we're going on vacation for 2 weeks. Do what you want, right? And so that's why you got outsourced activity of people who often, you had third-party organizations, and that's why it varied by location. That's why when I saw the map of Georgia, it made no sense. You saw places that usually vote together vote differently, and you dig into it, the place that voted differently had unusual turnout, and unusual turnout directly overlapped with Biden voters. And then when you looked at where that unusual turnout, we broke it down. It was in precincts with apartment buildings, with a lot of disparate apartment buildings, nursing homes, and mail drops. And one of the mechanisms by which, just hypothetically speaking, that such voter fortification can occur, election fortification can occur, is if you have third-party middlemen picking up and delivering these ballots, and having no U.S. Postal Service involved, having no election official directly involved. The drop boxes were an invitation to constitutionally questionable ballots being counted in the election. That's what some of us said from day one. The only mechanism to test this was a meaningful signature match against the outside of the ballot. That was my proposed legal remedy for President Trump. And no state to this day has ever conducted a meaningful signature match on this ballot. So this goes to Dennis Prager's criticism in the film of D'Souza's position. And Dennis Prager, warmonger, some other things. So just put that out there. I get he's good on a lot of cultural issues. He's not on a lot of other issues. But he has good taste in cigars, but that's the scope of it.
He did come around.
He was saying, hey, you can't prove this ballot was an illegal ballot. Well, first of all, if it wasn't cast in a constitutionally qualified manner, it's an illegal ballot, period. End of story. Doesn't matter whether the person intended or wanted their ballot to count. If you don't cast your ballot in a constitutionally qualified manner, it's an illegal ballot. One mistake that was made was focusing on the word fraud. You don't have to prove fraud in an election contest. You just have to prove a ballot was counted in a unqualified manner legally. I call it constitutionally qualified because in the presidential election contest, the only rules that matter are the ones established by the legislature of each state. The executive branch can't unilaterally change it constitutionally, but that's what happened in 2020. And it facilitated and enabled the 2000 Mules to exist. But like the fact checkers that are saying, well, there's a lot of inferences and they're second guessing D'Souza's film. I want those fact checkers to explain to me why people are delivering multiple ballots at multiple locations at weird times, wearing surgical gloves, putting the ballots in, then taking the surgical gloves off and throwing them in the trash can.
Well, we'll talk about that one. Let me just
election fornication. I like that. I like that. I'm going to steal that. Election fornication. They were doing a lot of election fornication in 2020.
I tell you what, I actually thought that said fortification. I thought I was Googling the article from Time Magazine, which, by the way, funny enough, now seems to be behind a paywall when it wasn't when I initially did the story on it, when I covered this a little while back, just to talk about it. So I'm not, go F yourself, Time. I'm not doing that. But Robert, okay, so hold on. So one thing at a time. The ballot harvesting. This was at issue in the Project Veritas lawsuit against the New York Times, where they said that there was a New York law that suspended Minnesota. Okay, sorry, Minnesota, where they said it suspended the application of the law so that ballot harvesting was legal, which turned out to be false. And I think you need to flesh that out. So The suspension of the law that would have outlawed ballot harvesting had not been implemented. So ballot harvesting in Minnesota, Ilhan Omar's district, was illegal, meaning third parties who are not power of attorney or, I don't know, mandated to carry a third party's ballot would not be allowed to have any other person's ballot for the purposes of transporting and depositing in a drop box.
Precisely. It was like, I grew up in Democratic politics. I used to work in Democratic politics as a campaign consultant as a kid. And one of the things you do is, in a Democratic election, you went to certain precinct chairmen or people in that community who had influence, and you paid them cash, and they said they could deliver a certain number of votes for you. Right? Nobody knew how. Nobody knew why. The hard part was, with that method of political machine, was you couldn't guarantee the person would vote the right way, right? Because they go in, they cast their ballot in person and in secret, and they personally put the ballot in. The utility to a mule-driven system is you can be there when they fill out that ballot, or maybe you fill out the ballot yourself, just hypothetically speaking.
And you're just recommending to them. This is who you want. You take like vulnerable people in nursing homes. They had a few examples.
You see some of the ones they broadcast in the movie from Wisconsin. I mean, those people can't move or talk, and they've been voting for decades. You voted in 2020.
Look, you can write it off as either fabricated, liars, or one-offs. But in the movie, they had at least 5. People were clearly unable to vote. They were clearly unable to do anything. That's why they were in a nursing home, probably under a curatorship of sorts. Okay.
I mean, they were put into places because they were unable to care for themselves. So and many of them were just mentally incompetent. Not only that, the nursing home turnout varied. You had nursing home turnout just down the street. You'd have one nursing home would turn out at 90%. Down the street, one turned out at 60%. And it's like, and they're the same qualifications to get into both. I did this work in Georgia, and it was like, okay, don't think so. So we just have great credit to Dinesh D'Souza, because he took a big risk even talking about this topic. Fox News doesn't want to go into detail about it. The institutional Republicans don't want to discuss it. One little great tidbit he put in is that on the January 6th cases, that they had to have had a bunch of the cell phone data of those people before January 6th in order to identify them so quickly, because of how they used the data, that they couldn't identify them within 24 hours unless they actually had their data 3 days, 4 days before, which tells you something about what was going on.
Well, but
that was his little January 6th tidbit. He just dropped in. But credit to Dinesh D'Souza for even covering this topic, because a lot of people in the institutional right did not want it to be discussed. And the Republican National Committee sure doesn't want to highlight in a spotlight on how not only do they blow it all the way up to the election, but that they grifted their own donor base out of 100 million plus cash, rather than do the work that Dinesh D'Souza and these groups did.
Okay, look, there were 2 things that I had to get to. The rubber gloves. One argument is going to be the woman's wearing, in the movie, the woman wears rubber gloves, the latex things.
Surgical gloves, I call
surgical gloves, stuffs a bunch of stuffs, drops off. It seems like multiple ballots. I don't remember if this was at 3 in the morning or late at night, and then takes her gloves off and throws them out. There's a garbage right next to it. Some people are saying it's mid-COVID hysteria. She's wearing gloves because she's, nervous.
But why'd you take them off?
Well, first thing this, if she's nervous about the germs on the ballots, that would imply that she's delivering not her own ballot and more than one ballot that's not her own, which in and of itself would be problematic. Second thing, if she's that COVID crazy, she's going to keep those gloves on afterwards. So one way or the other, I don't think that argument makes sense. Okay, she was wearing gloves because it's COVID and she's nervous. Okay, then you keep them on. And if she's nervous because she's handling a ballot not her own, that in and of itself is already a problem, I think, Robert. And then that would assume it wasn't at like 3 in the morning, which was kind of nuts. But so the rubber gloves, it might be more for color, but the substance of this is that you have people attending multiple ballot boxes in the same day, and then also coincidentally or not attending 501c3 entities that are involved in encouraging fortifying the elections, as per the Time article magazine, which is now no longer accessible to the public.
I mean, put it this way, cocaine traffickers have been convicted on a lot less.
But Is there, Robert? Is there any? So, if you're going to attack this movie, you're going to go on one of two things: either the methodology is flawed and the numbers are wrong, or there's a perfectly plausible explanation because the methodology is fine.
The fact checkers so far have mostly tried to ignore like Dennis Prager's response in the film is what makes this ballot illegal, and that in one part of the film that probably could have been, if they would have had some other lawyers involved, it could have helped, I think, because the context is if a ballot doesn't strictly comply with the law in terms of who voted and how they voted and how the vote was processed, the ballot was processed, it's an illegal ballot, period. You don't have to prove fraud. You don't have to prove anybody intended to defraud anybody. It's an illegal ballot, period, end of story. And so the question is, are these illegal ballots? The mere fact that in many of these jurisdictions, you have somebody delivering somebody else's ballot makes it an illegal ballot, period. Just that fact by itself. But the second aspect is definitely inferential. But it goes back to that story I told. The advantage of drop boxes and mass mail-in voting is, one, ballots were everywhere. So chain of custody on ballots was gone. So traditional chain of custody on ballots, they're strictly numbered. These days they have like digital identification that they are strictly controlled where they go all the way through the process. This was recently discussed by Oliver Stone in his new JFK documentary about the problems of the chain of custody of the magic bullet under the single bullet theory of Arlen Specter, who got himself a senatorial gig out of that racket. But that's another story for another day. The chain of custody of the ballot is impaired when you mass send them out by mail. We've never done that before. Never in American history had this ever happened, that we just flooded the system with ballots. And what happens is that's the first step. The second step is you need somebody to deliver those ballots. And now you probably, I should say that's a third step, is the delivery. The second step is you need somebody to fill out those ballots. And the question is, how many of those? I mean, I'm here in Las Vegas, and guess what I got last week? 2 ballots in the mail. One for me, one for somebody that hasn't lived here in 10 years. So, I mean, if I was unethical, could fill out that ballot, send it right in. But let's say I didn't want it to track back to me. I have a bunch of ballots sent to, say, a homeless shelter, an apartment complex, a nursing home complex. And I got somebody on the inside willing to organize them and give them to me to fill out, give it to the mule to deliver. And then there's multiple levels removed of liability and culpability. And that's what the system describes. And that's why it matters. And that's why there isn't a good counter. They have to pretend it doesn't matter when then legally it absolutely did.
And some of the video surveillance was egregiously incriminating. It's unless Dinesh D'Souza is lying to all of us, or he got.
And this is just a tiny slice of what was seen. I mean, there's also the whistleblower interview, who the National Republican Senatorial Committee finally woke up to this after the election for the Georgia runoff, but still did nothing about the information he was reporting. He was like, people are showing up in vehicles from Texas, from South Carolina, not Georgia license plates.
Crossing state lines, people. It's that in and of itself.
Exactly. And dropping off multiple ballots. And it was consistently a problem. I think the remedy that people should come out of this is we should not have drop boxes, period. And we should not have mass mail-in voting, period. Because either one of these create this opportunity.
It's a stupid question, maybe. Why drop boxes and not mail-in ballot? Like, who makes it to a drop box but not to a post office?
Yes. It's what it does is it interferes with the chain of custody, so it makes it easier. Because like if the U.S. Postal Service comes by and you say, here's 50 ballots for you, a little bit more of a problem.
Yeah.
Right. You drop it off at a U.S. The chain of custody is better tracked within the governmental record system. So that's why they like drop boxes, because it short circuits the election officials, short circuits the U.S. Postal Service. And it's an invitation to fraud. So even if you don't think any fraud occurred, it will happen in the future.
But Robert,
it's guaranteed. As long as we have mass mail-in voting and drop boxes, fraud, we have a huge security flaw in our election integrity.
You caught yourself right in time. But Robert, Steelman it. Who could make it to a drop box that could not make it to a post office?
There's nobody. Not only that, the post person comes to your door. You can deliver it to them right at the door if you want. I mean, most postal people come deliver right to your own mailbox right there, so that you can deliver it right there. So there's no need for it at all. It's much easier to personally mail in a ballot than to give it to someone to drop it off at a drop box. So what it did is the other way this worked is or the way it could work for partisan purposes is knowing that one party is much more likely to utilize this in this way for illicit purposes than the other. But any party can use this, and that's why it's so dangerous. And that's why Jimmy Carter and Jim Baker both agreed in 2005 in the Election Reform Commission that mail-in balloting and absentee balloting presents the greatest risk to election security. And we had the least secure election just by procedures than we've ever had in American history in 2020. And what this 2000 Mules documents is we have lots of reasons to doubt the integrity of the outcome of that election.
And by the way, the one great thing about this documentary was it had a moment like Crossing State Lines for Rittenhouse about the most secure election in the history of America. They made a montage, which was very reminiscent of the montage that they made about crossing state lines. The montage they're going to make about X, Y, and Z. I don't want to get too political. Okay. No, it wasn't wine, people. It was cosmopolitan of sorts. So okay, so I'm not.
But yeah, so that's a good. I recommend the film. Good film. And but speaking of lawless actions, there's probably no greater one than what happened at the Supreme Court last week.